Hi, this is Lamar, and you're listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in a spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. Getting to Third Space is produced by Tenacious Change, a consultancy committed to creating resilient, nonprofit organizations. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now let's get to third space today.
Hey, good morning, Lamar. How's it going in Kansas today?
Good morning, Tom. It's going well in Kansas. How about you?
Oh, man, has it been hot out here? I mean, it has really been hot. And actually, we just come off of 4 record-setting days of heat, in which the actual temperature was over 100, and the real field temperature was what I would call pizza baking. You know, it was hot.
Save on your gas range bill by going outside and frying your eggs, right?
Absolutely. Pizza, whatever. I mean, it was really hot. And I have to say that, so the first day I did not play any golf because it was so hot, but I had one of these busy golf weeks, right? So I didn't play the first day because it was too hot and the air quality was really bad. And I thought, nah, I don't want that combination. The second day I played, and because it was supposed to be cooler, it wasn't. It was like real feel was 113 when we finished, but it was a dry heat like Arizona. So, I had no idea. And then yesterday it was a kind of a humid heat. I really felt it, but it's still, yeah.
Well, we were camping.
Yes.
In the Ozarks in southern, or central Missouri.
Yeah.
And so we were there for 5 days, all types of weather, thunderstorms, nice breeze days, and then the heat hit. Now, when you go to a resort, everything is nice and clean and, ready for you. When you have a family lake house, you have to kind of get it all ready. And we were the first ones to use it for the year. And it took us a day to, not just Carla and I to do cleaning, but also my brother and another person. It took us a day to get everything cleaned and ready to go. Power washing the decks, when things... if things are not just used weekly, it takes some time to clean. So we were cleaning for probably a good day and a half, almost 2 days, and in preparation for having our family show up and having kind of a little family reunion. But it was beautiful. Had nice rains in the morning, and on the way back. After everybody left, so we stay another day because you have to do all the laundry and all of that kind of stuff and get the beds ready to go again. So we did all of that. We left on Monday, heat advisory for Kansas. We pull into Huston, actual temperature 108 coming into town.
That was pretty hot even for Huston, isn't it?
That is hot for Kansas.
Yeah.
And so we pulled in, backed up to the garage, and we did clean out the camper that afternoon, but we went from one air conditioning unit to the next. But it was hot. But things have cooled down a little bit. It's been nice. Been doing a little bit more work outside.
Well, the 1 year that I lived in Kansas many years ago.
With the tumbleweeds, right?
With the tumbleweeds, yes,
yeah, that's
but
right.
Not from the south.
That's from the south,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, from the south. But we we were. I was living actually a little further west than you. I think maybe
Right.
close to 100 miles further west,
Almost.
and no air conditioning. The only thing we had was something called a swamp cooler.
Oh yeah.
Oh, those are interesting. Gigantic things you sit on a window and you hook the hose up to, and the water trickles down over these leather straps, and a fan blows air in. Now, actually, what really is nice about it is because the heat is so dry out there that it actually brings a little bit of humidity in, and you do feel cooler. But it's an interesting thing. When people said, "Well, what you need is a swamp cooler," I thought, what? I mean, I had never lived in a house with air conditioning anyway, so this was a different experience. So, yeah, okay.
So but it is hot, but hopefully moved away from that for the next while anyway.
I hope so too. I hope so. Yep. Well, speaking of hot topics.
My.
So, last podcast, we were talking about the mass shooting at XL Industries where you were the HR director. And I think that what we did is we kind of quizzed each other at the end about, why we feel it's important to talk about this. And I think one of the things that came up was not exactly a fear of, but more of an anxiety that with the way the rhetoric is going and the way things are going in our political system right now, with the big presidential election coming up in November, that in fact there could be violence related to it.
And violence coming from either side of the spectrum.
From either side of the spectrum, and of course then there was this last weekend, right?
That's right. Where the former president was speaking in Pennsylvania, right? And there was a assassination attempt where he was injured, slightly injured, but still injured, and so close to receiving a fatal attempt.
And of course, we need to acknowledge that in fact there were fatalities. There was a man that was covering his family that was hit and killed instantly. There were two other people that were, by midnight on Saturday, were in critical condition as a result of the shooting, and have since been upgraded to stable, I think, by Monday morning of this week. So
Tom, I remember distinctly at the end of the podcast, the last one we did, you kind of made this statement that this is something that concerns us. Tell me a little bit about what was happening in your thinking that you actually were saying, man, I'm really worried that something violent could happen here in this political world.
Well, I think it is just it's not just the words, it's the tone, it's the continuous drumbeat of language that we hear in the media, and much of it comes from the what are called the MAGA Republicans, but not all of it comes from the MAGA Republicans. And on both ends, in the extremes, we do hear some pretty rough language about the other, and that's concerning. I was a little surprised, and I know that the investigation is still ongoing. No, I really wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised that the shooter in this case was a registered Republican, and he would have voted in his very first election in 2024 this fall. It's my understanding that he contributed to a political group in support of the Democrats in 2017, but then about a year later he removed himself from the mailing list of that group, and then when he was of age, he registered as a Republican. And I think that what that says to me is that while we can expect some kind of this language in coming from the extremes of the parties, that there may also be within more of a broader middle a group of folks that are very frustrated with what is happening in terms of their parties.
You and I have tried to stay away from politics.
We really, yes, we have, and
we
not
felt
not
like
in our private conversations, but
no, but with this podcast. But I think we felt that with the topics we've been talking about, we've just kind of been thrust into this, needing to have this conversation together on this podcast. As part of it, there's been a lot of commentary out there, and by far from people who have had a lot more insight and experience than you and I have. However, is some things that you and I've talked about, and some things that we have been watching and listening to remind us that there has been kind of a steady progression over the years that would suggest that our concern that we brought up in the last podcast was valid. So there's podcasts that I think both of us listened to separately. We didn't even share with each other, but by Rachel Kleinfeld on the Good Fight podcast with Ishika Monk, just a couple of days ago in response to the shooting. But one of the things that she points out in that podcast is that over the last several years, I mean, before even the election in 2016, but before that time, we've been seeing progressively, violence, political violence happening at a variety of levels. Of course, people pay attention, and the media pays attention to the January 6th, to the attack on Paul Pelosi. They pay attention to that. There was quite a bit of attention paid a few years ago. Remember the congressional baseball team where there was a shooter, and there were injured individuals there.
Well, and it goes back even further to Gabby Giffords.
That's right, to Gabby Giffords,
out in Tucson, Arizona, who was and permanently disabled as a result of the attack during a campaign stop.
But I think that what Kleinfeld also points out is this has also been happening over the years in local kinds of political arenas, school board meetings, city council meetings. Certain legislators have had threats. So it's not just acts of violence, but it's also been threats. So there's kind of been this move that's been developing over the years. So it isn't surprising, and but it's very sad commentary on kind of where we're at today.
Well, and you mentioned that, and I just had this memory of so I worked in a somewhat controversial field for a time of adolescent reproductive health and sexuality education, and in that time I was stalked, I was yelled at, I was screamed at, I was physically accosted on at least one occasion, and I had a colleague who was at a school board meeting in which one of the in the midst of her presentation, one of the school board members threw a pen at her, and not just like a wimpy little Bic pen. I mean, it was a heavy pen. I suggested she might want to pick it up and keep it if it was a nice one, but but I mean, and that's going back 30 years, Lamar. There seems to be this point at which, either the rhetoric that people are using when they're forming their opposition against groups or ideas is inflaming people, or their internal processing somehow says, okay, I've had enough. It's okay for me now to pick up something and throw it at another person, or it's okay for me to hit that person, or it's okay for me to yell and scream at that person. And actually that was part of that was a lot of what I was looking at with my doctoral dissertation, was how do you lead in the midst of conflict, and how do the people that are involved in a controversial issue, how do they effectively lead when there is so much heat around those things? And I was thrilled when I got to talk to about 38 different people for the study on both sides of the conflict. And it was really one of the most illuminating things I think I've ever done in my life. But in all of those cases, all of those people that I talked to, they personally never boiled over into violence against another. At least not that I'm aware of. I couldn't find any evidence of that. What I did find was that on both sides, they felt scared sometimes. They felt as if things that people were saying to them could actually erupt into violence. So I think what Rachel Kleinfeld is the point she's making is that this is not new. It's not new. I mean, this is part of what happens when we're in the middle of a culture war, and we got multiple culture wars going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a call just recently from a close connection of mine who, oversees a fairly large business organization, who said, "Hey, help me kind of think through this. I just got a call from a client who said they're going to take me down. Should I be worried?" And I said, "Yeah." Someone who's upset at you, they see you as a person in control, someone who has authority, someone who has maybe done something or made decisions or implemented, a policy or a decision that is not favorable to them in whatever way that is. And so the response is to hurt you or to threaten to hurt you. Take it seriously. And that's a sad commentary, I think, on kind of where we're at. When we decided to do this podcast, we knew that there's going to be thousands of podcasts who are talking about this, right? You proposed something that I thought was helpful, and that is, okay, so Lamar, read this. I think it was a podcast or an article, and we could maybe use this as how we talk about this today. And I thought that was a good idea, because we can continue to talk about what's frustrating us, but how do we respond to this? We've been talking about a third space conversations. We've been talking about trying to implement change. We've been talking about trying to take control over the narratives in positive ways, that everyone is at the table. But with things that are kind of at this level right now, you shared with me an article as a Substack, I think, newsletter.
Yeah, it's the article is titled "How to Walk Back from the Brink," and it's written by Luke Hollum, who's a senior editor with Persuasion. And in fact, in the show notes, we'll have a link to that article so people can also read it. But yeah, in that article, he offers 4 suggestions, and this is in the wake of the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. That he says there's really 4 things that need to happen if the country is to contain the threat of escalation. And it's so interesting because many of them really have to do with speech. And so we had thought that we would kind of take these 4 things, and we'll also overlay them in the video of this if people want to, check out the video. But we really want you to also take a look at the article, because the article will certainly give you a bit more. But we wanted to offer our take on these four, especially in the context of what it is we're trying to do, how we're trying to contribute to creating more civil conversations and dialogues through this podcast. So,
sure. Why don't we walk through those and kind of just share them and maybe make comments on those as we go.
That sounds good. I've got them up in front of me. Do you want me to ping them out there, or do you want to?
I've got them as well.
Oh, perfect. So and now people get to see what we do behind the scenes in our planning meetings. So odd or even, Lamar? Odd or even?
I'll do evens.
Okay. All right.
And by the way, thank you for the suggestion for the teleprompter program that makes this work for me. So, thanks.
Good. Well, so his Luke's first suggestion is this. He says politicians, especially Democrats, must condemn the attack in the strongest possible terms, setting the clear expectation that political violence will never be tolerated in the United States. So that's his first suggestion. Your thoughts on that, Lamar?
Well, my first reaction was this, that everybody who is playing in this arena, and that's metaphorically, but everyone who's involved in this political arena has to stand up and agree together to say this is not acceptable. This is not okay, and we can't tolerate it here in the United States, in our republic and in our democracy. This is not how we do things. And we need to reach out across the aisle in this case and hold hands and agree on this one. So I'm there. I think I've seen some of that. I've unfortunately seen some of that not happen.
Well, you know what really impressed me was President Biden's reaction to this. He reached out to Donald Trump immediately. He wasn't able to get through at first, but then he later did get through. Now, and bear in mind, this is just a couple weeks after the debate in which they could barely look at each other, and they didn't shake hands when they came onto the stage. There was nothing about that said this is a debate about ideas. It seemed very personal, and so, but he reaches out to Donald Trump, and they have a conversation, and both of them said it was a good conversation and it was appreciated. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to hear from both of them. Is that we connected, and we are in agreement that political violence will not be tolerated in our country.
And I think that agreeing that it's not going to be tolerated, I think it's important. Mr. Trump made a comment right afterwards. I think he sent it out on Truth Social. We need to unite as a country. Now, take that for what it is, but I think that message needs to be continue to be out there, that both parties agree. Someone needs to say, I agree with Mr. Trump. I'm from the Democratic side of things, and I'm with him on this. We need to unite. We need to reach across the aisle and say, not only is that not okay, but we need to make sure everyone hears that we are in agreement with each other about this. That's something that me as a consumer of all of this needs to see, to feel confident that that we're moving forward.
Number two.
Let's move to the second one. Number two is everyone who comments on public affairs must refrain from making incendiary statements.
Yeah.
Well, how many days are we from the shooting? Probably 5-6 days from the shooting. 5 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's unfortunately been some incendiary comments already made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From both sides.
Absolutely from both sides. And I'm sitting back here, and I'm sure many other people saying, okay, that's horrible to be some of the things that I've been hearing. Everything from jokes, to, blame, finger pointing. When and we're going to get this, I think, into the next item. But when we don't even really know the whole story, all we know was that former president was targeted and was slightly injured. But thankfully, he's still with us. But there needs to be those self-control. This is where I think what we need to expect from folks in the political realm is to realize this is not politics. This is violence.
You just said something that some of our listeners may just kind of pull back from and go, what? You just said, thankfully, he is still with us. But and that's something that we agree on, and everybody should agree upon whether or not they like Donald Trump, whether or not they think he should be president, whether or not they think he's qualified or to be president, any of that. And the reason really kind of goes back to some of the prep conversation that we were having. And that is that had that particular bullet hit him, it would have been a horrific experience that was captured in the media, that in front of thousands of people. And imagine where we might be today had that bullet hit him in the head and killed him. The thought of that, I know there's a lot of things. There are and there are not a lot of things settled about the January 6th riot. But there is a general feeling that's at some level, the crowd was inspired and was, jazzed up to go and do that. Imagine, if you will, if all of Trump's followers had seen his death on television like that. My concern is that we would be in the midst of a civil war, or headed that way by this time.
So I go back to that that podcast that I referenced early on with Rachel Kleinfeld, because she makes a statement that I think I totally agree with. Violence, when it happens, does not end violence. Political violence just will develop more violence. And I think her phrase is violence begets violence. And so, it doesn't, and I'm trying to be apolitical here because I really am on this topic. It doesn't matter who the victim is in this political arena. If that would have been a successful assassination, literally, violent hell would have been loosened because violence begets violence.
Right. Well, so as an aside, we all know very clearly that violence begets violence, because you remember growing up with your brothers, right? And I remember growing up with my friends. Somebody walks up and punches you in the arm. What do?
Yeah.
You punch them in the arm, and then they punch you harder, and then you punch them harder. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, and even if it's not a physical violence, one of the things we've seen in our political system the last few years is that acts of political violence, even if it just involves targeting one another for investigations or for some kind of criminal action, that's a back and forth as well. I mean, those mechanisms, those nonviolent mechanisms for payback or retribution, have been used.
I think also the rhetoric that's used, and I think you and I've talked about this. I think that we're seeing more similar types of rhetoric, being used across platforms.
Yeah,
which is concerning.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, we got to deal with the tone of the rhetoric.
Yeah. Well, are we ready for number 3?
Sure, go for it.
All right. Each of us must refrain from unfounded speculation about the presumptive shooter or his motives until the police have done their work or verified facts emerge. Well, darn. I mean, unfounded speculation is a lot of fun. I mean, when it comes right down to it. But no, I understand what he's saying, though. I get exactly what he's saying. This is the time that when people who love to deal in conspiracy theories will go absolutely wild. And they have already. Including the recently named vice presidential choice for Donald Trump. That shortly after this happened, J.D. Vance came out, and it's well documented that he laid the blame on President Biden for this assassination attempt.
Right, and there's damage that does, and it's hard to walk it back, even in the face of information that comes out later that would say, well, those speculations had no basis. I watched a interesting video last night from a gentleman who has a YouTube. He's a YouTuber, right? He sells product and he does some training videos on, I think, on guns, and then he does some other things related to, I'm not sure what they all are, but one of the things he does is he sells gear. So he has
wait a minute, he sells what?
Gear.
Oh, gear.
I'm sorry.
Gear.
Yeah.
I thought I heard you say ears. And
ears. He sells T-shirts and he sells, caps that are all promotional kind of items.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
Yeah. So he's devastated because the shooter was actually wearing one of his T-shirts that promoted his business, and so he was getting calls from news agencies saying, "Tell us your connection with this guy." He says, "I sell thousands of T-shirts and they're online sales, and I have no idea who these people." I mean, he said, "This is such a terrible event that I'm somehow connected to because he was wearing a shirt, which he says, I wish that would never have happened." But it's a unfortunate connection that he's trying to address. And, I think about the assumptions and that people make, as well as the desire to try to get a story. That's always been a frustration, that there's always a story being dug beneath the story, because there's got to be something there. And, when this may be a side, but I remember when we went to the Ted Koppel type news. Remember Ted Koppel?
I do.
24/7 coverage of the was it the Iran?
It was hostages in Iran.
Hostages, right? In Iran, right? And ever since then, that whole method of covering news has really developed into 24-hour coverage of news, and we know that how many times can you cover the same event and do it in a way that gives you an edge or a leg up on your competition, and And so there's this kind of method, or method's the wrong word, but kind of intense behavior of trying to find stories where maybe there's really not stories. And I think that, if politicians and others are fed that information, preemptively, that's dangerous information. You and I have talked about the importance of, when we're in conversations, making sure our information is good, solid information, that we get it from good resources, right? That's so important. Otherwise, it destroys productive conversations.
Yeah, I remember. And this is really going to age us dramatically, Lamar. But people already know we're a couple of old guys anyway. So, but there was a day when Walter Cronkite, with the CBS Evening News, was known as the most trusted man in America, because news at that time was largely, these are the facts, this is what is happening, very little editorializing. I think the most famous moment of editorializing for Walter Cronkite was when he announced the death of President Kennedy by assassination, and he took off his glasses and wiped a tear from his eyes. That was the most editorializing that we ever saw from him on air. Now, obviously, he held his own political views, right? But there was an effort, and I personally am sick to death of pundits, and so I think that's part of the reason we have really tried really hard to stay away from politics here. Is we don't want to end up as pundits by any means, because neither of us are either smart enough or brash enough or stupid enough to be to be pundits, right? But I'm very tired of them, and I don't want to hear them anymore. And so what I find myself doing is going to those that are the traditional sources of verifiable news. And I don't mean some of the more popular networks that are out there these days on the left or the right. I'm talking about there's actually websites you can go to where they will evaluate the bias in the news using very rigorous metrics. And I go to that on a regular basis, and if I'm hearing something from a source that I'm not too sure about, I'll go and I'll check it out. And if the bias is not within some level of tolerance, I don't listen to it. And I try to find those that have the least amount of bias to pay attention to, because I'm just so tired. And what we don't, I think, fully understand is the connection between conspiracy theories and some of the punditry that we're hearing. That sometimes the pundits just simply drop things out there that they don't really have complete information on, but they think that this might be what it is. And it doesn't take much for that then suddenly to be blown into the truth, or some kind of conspiracy theory.
Let's move on to the fourth point.
All right, let's do that. Yeah, otherwise I'm going to have to get a bigger ladder from my soapbox here.
Yeah, it's all right. We both have soapboxes. But this author is saying that 2024 election must proceed as planned. I totally agree. This attempt would be successful in a way if it ended or stopped this election process. That's kind of my 2 cents, how I would look at it. I mean, this is an interesting election all the way around. There's so many pieces to this that are unusual. And we've got, about 4 months yet to go to get through November? And
I was thinking it felt like, a decade. It's only about 4 months. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting ride, that's for sure. But a lot can happen. And to let this interference as severe as it is. I mean, someone lost their life and 2 people are seriously injured. The former president was injured and it's got to be traumatized at some level. The point being is that we have to recognize that, accept that, and deal with that, but we can't let it interfere with the intent of the shooter, which was to interfere with the election. Let me back that up. Back myself up there. I used the word intent. We don't know what his intent was. That hasn't come out. So I want to be careful I don't put that out there as though I think that's what his intent. We don't want that action to interfere with the election.
I think it is. I think that one of the things that has been verified in the news is that they found in his car and in his home multiple explosive devices. And so that, of course, suggests a whole nother level of destruction that he may have had in mind. We don't know for sure. Nobody knows. That's why they're doing this investigation. Certainly, a lot of that investigation is focused on any failures within the Secret Service around this, and the local police and so on. And indeed, there were probably failures. But what is perhaps more concerning to me is that it would seem as if this could have been an opening act, not a final act. So let's kind of take this down to the kind of point us in the direction of third space conversations. Right.
I mean, that's what this podcast is about.
Right.
And you and I had to decide whether we would walk through this podcast with this topic, but I think we agreed that it had to relate to what we do here and what our intent for this podcast is.
Right.
I think about the conversations that I've had so far about this, and it hasn't been a lot because I've been at the Ozarks,
Right.
So I know I'll have more. I got a coffee group coming up, to go to.
Oh, your
tomorrow.
coffee group.
My coffee group. But what's your thought about the kinds of things we've talked about with the importance of third space conversation and this traumatic event that we're going through?
Well, you've got your coffee group. And about a month or so ago, here in the community that we live in, a couple of guys got together and they started a discussion group for community members. And it's drawn anywhere from 30 to 50 people a week. And I went yesterday. I've gone to all of them. They're really quite fascinating just to hear how people are thinking and feeling about things that are going on. And I think one of the best things that they've done is that they have waded right into some of the most difficult conversations that we're facing right now. And yesterday's, I arrived late, so I didn't get in on all of this conversation. But yesterday's conversation was really about the assassination attempt. And then they asked a question at the end about, they did kind of a poll. They wanted to know how this assassination attempt may have changed, the elections coming forward, and how and related particularly to how people think things will come out. So they posed the question: who do you think will win the election now? There were about 35 people there. 11 of them said that they thought it was going to be Mr. Trump. 14 said they thought it was going to be Mr. Biden, and the remainder didn't have anything to say about it. I think one of the things I would really that I think that we've been kind of going towards here with our podcast, and we're probably going to go deeper on as soon as our friend Ed Schrager in London gets his app up and running again, is this idea of bringing people together for conversations, and it's really, it's time for people to start practicing those conversations. And I think that the assassination attempt actually gives us a really good opportunity to do that, to sit with another person and just say, let's talk about the assassination. Let's, keeping all of what was the incendiary comments off to the side. How do we feel that this assassination attempt is speaking to us as a society right now, and how do we think it is going to impact the upcoming election? And I think that gives us a great opportunity to practice all of those things that we've been talking about: respecting the other person, listening first before you jump in and try to offer your opinion, trusting the other person enough that you both are there with goodwill to try to establish a communication about important issues. So I think there's an opportunity here that's been presented by this.
I agree. And I think that, we just briefly talked about the quality of the information that we have. This is also a good time to find ways to get good information, own it, and process it with other people, and talk about it. We had Seth Kaplan on the first part of the year. Had even a 2-episode thing, and then he was talking about the fragility of our communities, of our state, and that was a conversation that I go back to in my mind oftentimes. I'm fortunate that I do live in a small place or a small community where I can connect with people if I choose to, but I got to choose to do that. But even if you live in a large communities are often broken down into small communities as well. And, being able to know your locals and being able to not only say hi to them on the sidewalk, but maybe sit down and have coffee, sit down and have a conversation. I like the idea of what your friends did was put together a discussion group. And there's several models out there. Maybe something we could do sometime, Tom, is talk about the models that are out there, the Socrates group and et cetera, the conversation cafes, ways that we could deliberately use the tools that we've been talking about for several months. You mentioned trust, respect, honesty, there's reciprocity, right? Ownership, creating a safe space, listening, learning from each other, and having conversations about hot topics like what we're going through right now, because they're so relevant. I was talking yesterday with my wife about some situations that in groups that we're part of. And it's like, we don't talk about the things that are bothering us or concerning us or that are important to us. We do talk about the things we have in common, which is great. But yet, what's happened in some of our groups is we have lost relationships because of those things that we haven't talked about. We haven't processed through them. But what if we had that opportunity using the third space models, and there's a variety of them out there, to learn, to educate ourselves, and to find a way to process with people who maybe think differently than we do. How would that impact our community, and how might that impact things broader than us in our communities? That's my thinking.
You just said something that I think it makes me think that we need to say this a little bit more explicitly. When we're talking about getting the third space, we're not talking about a method. We're not talking about a specific, these are the things you do, yada, 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 to get there. We're talking about an idea that people need to seek to establish a third space kind of environment for people, for them to have conversation with people. And as you said, there's a lot of models out there for how to do this. We're not offering a model. We're just saying do it. It's time to it's time for us to actually begin to engage one another in using whatever model you are comfortable with, whatever model works for you, as long as it brings you together in mutual trust and respect and listening and hearing one another, and allows you to really chew on some of these things together. That's what we're saying. We're not selling anything here. Hey, if we were selling something here, we'd be a lot better off than we are. But we're not selling anything. We don't charge for this podcast. We're not selling T-shirts or caps or anything else. Certainly not selling autographs, for crying out loud. But we're not pushing anything. Yeah, we're not pushing products here that you have to buy from us or anything. We're doing this because this is a concern to us. This is something that we are worried about, for our country and for our communities more than anything else, because we all live in communities, right? We're not living in the middle of the wilderness all by ourselves. All right, some people might be, but we're not. We're living in community, and we want to make sure that our communities are healthy, safe places for all of us to be. So,
maybe that's a good presentation or conversation that we can follow up on to kind of wrap this up. I shared with you earlier that I've been listening to some David Brooks, who was the writer and columnist from New York Times and has written a number of books. I think he was a pundit at one time as well.
Well, he's still kind of a pundit.
So he still is kind of a pundit,
but he's one of the better informed ones.
Yeah. But one of the things he mentioned, and I thought it was interesting, he says, our culture is over politicized and under moralized. And I'm going to keep thinking about that. I think that we have control over our culture. Our culture is us.
That's
culture
right.
is how we do things. Our culture is how we treat each other. And I would challenge us, you and I, as I challenge those who are listening, for us to take that seriously and realize that it's about who can I sit down with, who can I have a conversation with, and intentionally talk about things that maybe we don't agree on, but find an outlet, find a stage for us to do that with all those tools that we've been putting out there. So
that's a good last word, Lamar.
All right,
because it's about that time anyway, right?
I'm good with that. Yeah. Well, this has been interesting. We've not done a podcast like this, and honestly, hopefully, I'm hoping we don't have to do another one on a similar topic.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but we felt that we didn't have much of a choice, that we needed to talk about what happened in the assassination attempt and how that fits with kind of our thoughts.
Yeah, and whether regardless of your affiliation, regardless of whether you think either of these men are the greatest thing since sliced bread, or either of these men are the spawn of Satan, please join us in wishing good health. Absolutely. And safety for both of them. We don't need an assassination. We don't need anything of this nature. We need for our election to go on and happen as planned.
Absolutely. And with that word, Tom, I bid you farewell. This has been an interesting process. Thank you so much.
It has been. All right. Stay cool out there. Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.